In 2020, we had to tragically endure months of violent and destructive riots, primarily from a single political side of the spectrum, the radical left. Then at the end, we had to cap it off with violent riots from the political right in DC. This has led to some comparisons, and I believe that it is valuable to compare and contrast exactly what we saw happen throughout the months here. So I drew up a few points that we can speak to about the insurrection that we saw on both sides of the aisle. So everyone likes to call what happened in DC insurrection, which is fine. The definition of insurrection is an uprising against an established authority. However, by that definition, we also have to call everything that happened from June through the end of the year insurrection. We saw claiming of US land as autonomous zones. We saw claiming of federal and local courthouses and established government buildings. We saw police being run out of their precincts. We saw people getting killed and shot and beat up in the streets, stores being looted and burned down, and private houses being burned down. So we've seen insurrection for, sadly, the majority of 2020. But let's compare a few points here, because I've seen some really odd passes being given to one side, the left, and some really odd demonization of the right. Now, I say let's just disown them both. Weren't they all terrible? However, if we're going to compare and contrast and play that game, I think that we need to be armed with the facts and go through a few categories here. So let's do it. First of all, we have length and frequency. How long did this violence and destruction persist? And how frequent was it? How frequent was it at the events of these respective sides of the political aisle? Where you see a very common claim circulating that 93% of BLM and Antifa protests or events were peaceful. Number one, the study behind that has a lot of gaps in its reasoning and its definition of what makes something violent, what makes something a gathering, right? A gathering of over 10 people, over 3 people, over 4 people, and a lot of other details make it very shaky in the study's integrity. However, let's say that we accept that 93% were peaceful. That means 7% out of hundreds of protests were violent and destructive. Now, I don't think that's an excuse. Let's take those numbers. I still don't think that's good. That's no excuse. That's no defense at all. And here's the evidence of it. No one, exactly nobody, makes that argument about the Trump rally that turned violent in DC. No one says, okay, but we had thousands of Trump rallies throughout 2020 and throughout the last 4 years, and this is the one that turned into a deadly riot. No one makes that argument because it's a bad argument, because it's an excuse. It doesn't matter. So let's hold the people accountable. That's frequency. Then, how long did they persist? Well, I think we know that the riots on the left persisted for months. They were supported for months. People were bailed out for months by celebrities and elected officials, including our now sitting Vice President Kamala Harris. On the right, we saw that this riot persisted for a day. So does this make either of them okay? No, but let's keep it within context. We need to address these things as they arise and treat them within reality. Months are worse than a one-day event. Next, let's go to the reaction of the media, of celebrities, of elected officials. One side was elongated and supported for the drawn-out period that it happened, and that was the left side of the aisle when they were rioting. The other side was immediately condemned by everybody in a bipartisan way, as both of these should have been. Then let's go to the left side of the aisle. How were they reacted to from a law enforcement perspective? Well, we saw that American soil was claimed in a manner comparable only to the Confederacy of the United States when they claimed American soil for their own. This makes them traitors in Chaz and Chop, who set up with armed guards, with barriers, and claimed an autonomous zone on American soil as their own. And even so, the National Guard and military and federal intervention was rejected by leftist leaders, and it was called authoritarian when it was proposed. How about when the right side rioted? The National Guard was sent in minutes. In less than an hour, the National Guard was authorized and sent. It's a drastic difference, and we have to ask, why? Next, let's compare deaths, and let's just recognize that it is what it is. Any death at all in an unlawful manner is tragic and should not have happened. However, on one side, at the DC riots, we had 4 killed. On the other side, throughout months of left-wing riots, we had 35 plus killed. We had 700 cops hurt at the hands of leftists and 14 cops hurt at the hands of the right wing in DC. Then let's move on to buildings damaged. This should be always downstream, I believe, of humans hurt and killed, but still damage is damage, and especially when it comes to buildings that feed someone's livelihood, like a private business or something that someone has put in their time that they can never get back, their blood, sweat, and tears into building. It's not just the physical building, it's the business that they might not get back. And a lot of people say, yeah, but they had insurance. Yeah, lots of these people didn't have enough insurance to cover the rubble removal and everything that it took to rebuild. And that's not an excuse anyway. Saying that, well, they had insurance, so the crime was okay, that's an awful argument. So dozens of federal buildings were damaged by the radical left throughout the months. One federal building, the U.S. House, was damaged, or the U.S. Capitol was damaged by the right. Small businesses were destroyed by the dozens by the radical left over months. No small businesses were destroyed by the right-wing riots. And then let's go to how were we taught to react to this as a population? Well, we saw that Fox News and public billboards, I was down in Georgia and I saw one of these myself, are posting pictures of people who were involved in the right-wing riots and the violence that happened in DC and saying, help us find these people, help us find these criminals. There's billboards up about it. Fox News is running the names and saying, do you know this man? Do you know this woman? Can we find this? I didn't see any of that for the BLM or Antifa riots. If you did, please let me know if I'm wrong on this one. I'm just telling you what I've seen and what I've heard other people say they saw. I see no evidence that any of that happened for the months of deadly, destructive left-wing riots. Again, I'm not justifying anything here. I'm saying that reaction should have been applied to both. We should have been finding these criminals and these absolutely terrible individuals who hurt people and killed people on both sides, but we're only seeing it applied to one side. It should make you scratch your head. So that's it for this video, guys. I think it's already a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I just wanted to break this down by categories and see the severity of what was happening here. So I've heard arguments like, yeah, well, you know, this one was in the U.S. Capitol and it was a federal building. Well, number one, dozens of federal buildings were attacked and claimed by the radical left throughout the months of riots. So that argument falls apart. Number two, there's an argument that, yeah, but this one was at the U.S. Capitol, right? Isn't it worse because it was at the Capitol? I'll talk about that in the next video. That's all for this one, guys. Take it easy.